read from my essay, which doubles as an introduction to the book. Every contributor to this book was invited to write an epistolary essay, so an essay in the form of a letter. And in very much thinking of the spirit and tradition of James Baldwin, in the epistolary essay In the Fire Next Time, the very first chapter, My Dungeon Shook, he addresses his nephew. And as I was sitting at my desk 3 days after the election, I just started thinking about the role that an epistolary essay can have in blending the personal with the political, the intimate ramifications of something like institutional racism in the case of Baldwin, and the intimate effect that it can have, as well as the sort of political, sweeping, incisive thinking. And so my letter is addressed to the reader. Each contributor was invited to address the letter to whomever they wanted, an ancestor, a community, a particular person, a child, a person in the future. So I'm going to read to you from my letter, Dear Reader, which begins with me sitting at my desk 3 days after the election, just the things that I'm thinking about and how this book came to be. I thought about a friend's daughter, age 7, black, born in the USA, who said that she was scared that Trump would make her family leave the country. And another friend's son, age 4, who has 2 mothers, just as my children do. He asked whether their family would be torn apart. I thought about my son, who was born days after Obama was first inaugurated, and had therefore always lived in a nation in which someone like him, black and multiracial, child of an immigrant, could be president. For months, my son had been talking about using his kung fu skills to defend his Mexican friends from Trump and his wall. On November 9th, he did not want to get out of bed for school because, he said, he refused to set foot in a nation where Trump was president. It was not an act of fear, it was a boycott. I thought about my 4-year-old daughter's words about Trump, spoken out of the blue. We're not beautiful to him. Nobody told me that. It's just a feeling I have. I also thought about my grandmother, a poet and activist in Uruguay who died during the dictatorship. Born in Argentina, exiled under President Juan Perón, who, it must be pointed out, was not a dictator but a democratically elected authoritarian, she found refuge in the calm little nation of Uruguay, only to later watch both her native and adopted countries fall prey to military coups and reigns of terror, imprisonment, disappearances, and torture. Her later unpublished poems found in her house after she died speak to the depths of her sorrow. She never had the chance to see those dictatorships lift. I wondered how she'd managed to get through each day, to stay alive inside, to keep fighting in the face of repression, to keep the faith, to take the long view. And I wondered about hope. Had she been able to retain any hope? Could she have imagined that years later, in 2010, 2 of the brutally tortured political prisoners of the Uruguayan dictatorship would rise up to become the beloved president and first lady of the nation? That José Mujica and Lucia Topolansky would preside over an era of unprecedented renewal and progressive change? In the thick of the bleak times, how could she have imagined such a future? How could she have imagined that the seeds of a bright future lay right there in the horrific times themselves? If I could go back in time to reach her, what would I say? And what would she, reaching forward toward me where I sat at my writing desk, have to say to me? I thought about you that morning, though I may not know you personally. I thought about the long journey ahead for you and for me and for all of us. And I wondered what we would do, what we could do, what we must do to get through these times as intact as possible, keeping sight of the long view, striving to stay sane, awake, engaged, and steadfast in the face of backlash and threats to the communities and values and democracy we hold dear. With all of that in mind, I started reaching out to writers to ask them to join me in what at first was a rather strange and nebulous project, a collection of love letters in response to these political times. The responses to my call for letters stunned me with their generosity, their depth, their keen insights, and raw sense of urgency. I could not be more moved or humbled by the authors whose words are gathered here. They are leading novelists, journalists, poets, activists, and political thinkers. They are a collective mirror of precisely what makes this society strong and beautiful. They are members of diverse communities with roots all over the world, hailing from Syria, Lebanon, Mexico, Cuba, Nigeria, China, Japan, Egypt, India, Puerto Rico, Iran, Guatemala, indigenous North America, Russia, and various parts of Europe and Africa. And they all claim the United States as home. They are neighbors and activists, professors and artists, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, straight and gay and transgender. They are Jews and Muslims, Christians and Buddhists, atheists and people undeclared in their spirituality. Above all, they are concerned citizens and community members who care deeply about their country and are compelled to offer their voices in the service of justice, courage, and radical hope. There will be many books written about the Trump era from a single author's point of view, and there's no question that many of those books will be invaluable. I look forward to reading them and learning from them. At the same time, it's my belief that the challenges of this era also call for a multivocal response, as there are truths about this moment that can only be fully expressed through the prismatic proliferation of voices. In other words, no soloist can fully capture the music of our times. We also need symphonies, because there are many truths, many ways of knowing, many perspectives from which these times are experienced, and it is precisely this dazzling range that gives our voices power and makes our coalition still, unstoppably, an ascendant majority in this country and the world. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much, Carolina. Thank you all for coming tonight, and I'm very honored to have joined this wonderful list of writers who contributed to Carolina's great anthology. And I'm sharing my letter with you now. It is called #FuckFascism, #FuckThePatriarchy. Dear Sally, we met tonight in Cairo when I was out grocery shopping, and you asked me if my name was Mona. You said you recognized my red hair. Like me, you are of two countries, Egypt and the USA. The day we met, I was thinking of the bad guys who have been winning in both our countries. In Egypt, a military dictator has filled jails with his opponents, including young people your age, and banned protests in a bid to instill fear and obedience in a country that rose up to demand freedom and dignity in the revolution of January the 25th, 2011. Despite his blatant disregard for our rights, his Western allies continue to sell us out by selling him weapons, justifying it with that euphemism, solidarity. When we met, hate was being rewarded with power and wealth in the United States. All day long on that day we met, I was consumed with the question, how do we make anti-fascism, anti-racism, anti-misogyny, and anti-bigotry rewarding and powerful? I was angry. I have been angry ever since Donald Trump was elected president. Anger fuels a lot of my work. It helps me to bulldoze my way to the words I need. All day long as a writer, I live with words. And because I appreciate the power of words and anger, and because I know that angry women are free women, nice and polite is how we're socialized as women, but these are not nice and polite times. I do not mince my words. So the theme of my letter to you, Sally, is this: #FuckFascism and #FuckThePatriarchy. I live on Twitter, and those two hashtags have become rallying cries for me. If we'd had more time on that Cairo sidewalk, I would have shared with you the ways I have determined to #FuckFascism and #FuckThePatriarchy. Instead, I came home and wrote this letter to you. You spoke to me in Arabic, an English accented Arabic that reminded me of my Arabic and of my younger self. Our ability to move back and forth between countries and cultures and identities is a tremendous privilege that enriches you in ways we need more than ever during these days of tribalism and nationalism. It can also be exhausting. Resist the demands to choose between your identities and resist the demands that you translate for one side or the other. Resist the attempts by those on all the different sides of you to dilute you to one thing or to shrink you into one box. Turn those boxes upside down. Complicate and confuse. I'm a big fan of complication. It humanizes us. And confusion, it scrambles the signals of the racists and bigots and creates space for you to be marvelous you in all your multitudes. You are more powerful when you complicate and confuse. I'm turning 50 this year. You're turning 17. I wish your entrance into adulthood wasn't accompanied by such tough political times in our two countries. But I love a good fight, and I hope you do too. In the heritage of both our countries, there are revolutionary women whose words are fuel for my revolution. I want to share some of them with you, in the hope that you will find useful ammunition among them. I have learned to carry the revolution, be it against patriarchy, fascism, or bigotry, within me, so that my resistance travels with me like a beloved totem. These women's words keep that revolution and my anger sparkling and alive. A nation cannot be liberated, whether internally or externally, while its women are enchained. That's Dorea Shafit. I am first and foremost a feminist, and so I begin with an Egyptian woman whose activism was central to our political rights in Egypt. In February 1951, Dorea Shafit and some 1,500 women stormed the Egyptian parliament demanding suffrage. Their action was one of the catalysts that helped gain Egyptian women the right to vote and run for political office in 1956. I begin with Shafit because I want you to remember that we have a feminist tradition in Egypt. The fight for women's equality and liberation does not belong to one nation or culture. It is global. I met you, Sally, just days before the inauguration of a US president who openly boasted about using his fame to grope women without their consent. Donald Trump also made racist comments against Mexicans and other Latinx people and bigoted remarks against Muslims and mocked a journalist with a disability. Trump's Vice President Mike Pence has a long record of homophobia and enmity towards women's reproductive rights. As we prepare for the election of these two men to the highest office of the country, my feminism is once again my biggest weapon. The fight for women's equality and liberation must always target racism, bigotry, classism, ableism, and homophobia. Because as Black lesbian poet and feminist Audre Lorde explained, I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own. Lorde's words from a keynote presentation at the National Women's Studies Association conference in 1981 are a reminder that intersectional feminism was and is the most effective way to fight patriarchy. My silences had not protected me, Audre Lorde said. Your silence will not protect you. Patriarchy and misogyny thrive on silence. Our job in the months to come is to yell. We must shout our opposition against injustice. Silence benefits racism, misogyny, and bigotry. We must yell and shout to ensure that no one can ever use the excuse, I didn't know. As author Zora Neale Hurston put it, if you're silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. We must expose injustice. We must name and shame it, and we must stay angry because angry women are free women. Remember, fuck being nice and fuck being polite. These are not nice or polite times. Be angry, be loud, and be free. And find your sisterhood with other angry women. Unite with them, organize with them, find strength in them. The hardest and the most important revolution always has been and will continue to be in the months ahead, the revolution of the self, the revolution of the mind, and the revolution of the heart. As Toni Cade Bambara said, revolution begins with the self in the self. We'd better take the time to fashion revolutionary selves, revolutionary lives, revolutionary relationships. That revolution of the self will help you resist demands that you choose between your identities, and that revolution of the self is what will free the multitudes you contain. Be intersectional. Make your heart too rebellious for the patriarchy's attempts to plant itself within you. Make your mind too free for fascism to claim your imagination. And above all, as you fight patriarchy and fascism in Egypt and in the United States, as you make yourself a mobile and transatlantic revolutionary against racism, misogyny, and bigotry, remember these words. They are my words for the revolution ahead. Resistance, stamina, survival. The foundation for those words and the foundation for our revolution must be joy. Those of us alive and able to resist and fight mustn't capitulate to misery. What we fight must be better. In love, solidarity, and sisterhood, Mona. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. I also want to add my thanks to Carolina for doing this. You are a uniquely skilled and supportive editor, which is a very rare thing. So I thank you for that. I've read this essay in public once before, and after I finished, a gentleman in the audience said, well, that was conciliatory, which got me thinking. And the thought that it led me to is that I suffer from something that was once well diagnosed by a friend as FWD, fiction writer disease. And what that amounts to is when you're in a room full of conservatives, you start espousing liberal ideas. But if you're in a room full of liberals, you start espousing conservative ideas. That's the job of a fiction writer, which I primarily am. That may help you to contextualize what I'm about to read. It's a letter to a Trump supporter named Paul Roll. Dear Paul Roll, I know your name because it appeared in a November 12, 2016 New York Times article, shortly after the election, about the loss of 1,400 jobs at the Carrier heating and air conditioning plant in Indianapolis. Despite being plenty profitable, Carrier was moving operations to Mexico because it could get people there to work for a lot less. The article said, when he drives to work each day before dawn, Mr. Roll passes warehouse after warehouse of giants like Walmart and Kohl's with help wanted signs outside promising jobs within. The problem is that they typically pay $13 to $15 an hour. I guess I could work 2 full-time shifts a day, he joked. You may not have been joking, Mr. Roll. That may have been the reporter's inaccurate spin. But seeing that comment upset me so much. I'm writing this in an airport where I was brought by a livery driver at 6:30 a.m. I asked him how long he had been on. Since noon the previous day, he said. In my city, this is true for many. The Mexican countermen at my local deli who leave home before dawn and return after dark, and from whom I've never seen anything but a smile in between. The Haitian dishwasher who, also without apparent resentment, washed dishes until midnight and then spent hours cleaning a restaurant where I moonlit as a prep cook last year. My own father, who at 63, after nearly 3 decades here, still works double shifts every Monday and many holidays. Even as their labor and work ethic are sending their children to places like UPenn and Harvard, and representing to me the very essence of what it means to be American. And even as I urge you to notice that the elite these kids will be forming had its origins in socioeconomic conditions far below yours, I mention this not to browbeat you, Mr. Roll. It did upset me to read another Carrier worker say in an article in the Indianapolis Star, in response to Carrier's offer of multi-year retraining and educational programs, plus financial help, quote, I've got 13 years in, and I don't really want to start back over. I'm a writer, Mr. Roll, part of that vaunted East Coast urban elite. I have 15 years in. Fewer and fewer people touch the kind of literary fiction I write, so that my own layoff from my beloved career, after all these years of working on average 6 and sometimes 7 days a week, sometimes 10 hours a day and sometimes 16, is not so hard to imagine. I would feel most fortunate if someone offered to retrain me and pay me something while I did it. That said, it is as much a travesty that you must work a double shift to get by as it is that that Haitian dishwasher did. So I mentioned him to ask why you saw your salvation in Donald Trump instead of in an alliance with people like him. Please believe that I not only understand, but sympathize with part of Donald Trump's appeal. He speaks tough at a time when the world seems full of sharks. As someone who was born in a totalitarian state, sometimes I feel like I understand something many of my fellow liberals do not. There is true evil in the world, and you cannot negotiate with it. Sometimes the threat of escalation is worth the projection of force and deterrence. And I don't know whether, despite formative experiences in Indonesia and Kenya, corrupt, repressive, and authoritarian countries, our outgoing president, whose intelligence and spirit I could not admire more, felt the same way. But even this did not prevent him from eliminating Osama bin Laden, deploying more drone strikes than his predecessor, keeping Guantanamo open, and deporting 2 million undocumented immigrants. Everything is so frustratingly complex and nuanced, Mr. Roll. Donald Trump tried to hide this during his campaign, but it's one thing to stand up to evil and another to demonize and scapegoat so we don't have to feel responsible, or so the real villains remain in the shadows. Because I know that some of my fellow liberals address people like you with deferential sounding exhortation that sometimes poorly masks their condescension, exasperation, and ultimately incomprehension, I would like to do neither, but rather speak directly as I believe adults must, as I believe is far more respectful. Beware a sense of entitlement, Mr. Roll. Beware victimhood. And beware finger pointing, lest the finger point back at you. For a long time, conservatives have been saying that entitlement and victimhood are the specialty of the left. This is how Middle Eastern dictators justify their corruption and the impoverishment of their people. The Israelis are to blame for it. This is how Robert Mugabe keeps Zimbabwe on its knees. The West is responsible. For the Russians, who want only peace and love, the Americans are to blame. If you believe in American exceptionalism, Mr. Roll, you can see we are not so exceptional after all. Beware easy answers, Mr. Roll. Anyone can pander to sentiment to cloak the painful facts. In our case, that technology and automation are responsible for far more job loss than globalization. Perhaps we should deport Silicon Valley. And the nuanced facts, even when globalization is to blame, to undo it means not only bringing carrier jobs back, it means $25 t-shirts at the clothing store. You can't have one without the other, as you can't have healthy food without a high price tag. But nuance is unwelcome in our political discourse. A consideration of the whole picture, unwelcome. Unfortunately, all that's left then are lies. My favorite thing about the Carrier article was its lead photo, a black woman and a white woman, both Carrier employees, both under the same axe. The Republican Party has cleaved the white working class from working class people of color by exploiting a weakness to which co-sufferers are especially prone. I see it among my people, ex-Soviet immigrants, so many of whom refuse to see their past selves and present-day refugees precisely because they were refugees once. Beware being used, Mr. Roll. You have been told you are not like them, but you are. What proves it more than the double shift you must contemplate? As I am like you, for the same reason. Please know I see our salvation in the Democratic Party, in centrist liberalism, hardly more than in the Republican. Our salvation lies in our grasping the connection between us and the power it confers, and in understanding the self-deceit involved in handing it over to a man like Donald Trump, even as I agree Hillary Clinton would not have shifted the bedrock of what ails us. Who then, and how, and in what free time? I don't know, Mr. Roll, but I would like to meet you and figure it out together. With respect, frustration, curiosity, anger, empathy, and goodwill, Boris Fishman.
Thank you both so much. So I have a question for you both, which is I'm wondering, you got an email from me inviting you to this project. Thanks for jumping in. How did you decide, how did you go about landing on this topic for your essay? Was there a process there, or what was it that you wanted to bring forward in addressing these two people, Sally and Paul Rowell?
I'm always late on deadlines. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay. And as you know, I was very, very late with this one. And because I had truly been furious and enraged ever since the election of this fascist fuck, I will only say his name in the letter, but henceforth he's the fascist fuck. I was so furious. I felt like my sinuses were going to explode. I had nothing to get this fury out other than Twitter. And so I knew I had to send you something soon. And then I met this young woman, and Sally does exist. And it was really fortuitous. I was literally out with my beloved. We were buying groceries, and this young woman stops me, and we have this great conversation. And she reminded me of kind of the future for my nieces and nephews, because my nieces and nephews were born in this country. I was born in Egypt, but my nieces and nephews are the first Americans in our family. And it just made me wonder, what is it like for these kids? And, we already asked that question after 9/11 for Arab Americans and for Muslim Americans. What is it like to be in the United States after 9/11? And we're asking it again after the election of this fascist fuck. So I was like, this 17-year-old young woman is what my nieces and nephews will be in, 5 to 6 years. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to put all the rage into this and send it to Carolina with like 5 hours left before deadline.
Perfect. Well, and what's great about that too is that it's Sally and it's particular and it's personal, but that it's also she's standing in for also all of those nieces and nephews and other people beyond that who might also need that nourishment as well.
Yeah. I was trying to think of what my answer is. So I came to the States when I was 9 years old, and I'm 38 now. It's certainly long enough to have left behind some of the qualities and complexes with which I was saddled by immigration. But they have not left me. And the immigrant experience is characterized by a certain amount of hunger and hustle. And if on top of that, and perhaps this is why these qualities have not left me, and the insecurity without which you wouldn't be nearly as hungry or hustle as hard. I think in my case, those qualities were compounded by the fact that on top of being an immigrant, I chose to be a fiction writer. So like one set of insecurities wasn't enough. I wanted another on top to make sure the hunger and the hustle would never go away. You do feel like you're living on edge. You do feel like you can never, I had a friend who used to say, Boris, lower your shoulders, lower your shoulders. And you feel like you can never. But it has its upsides as well. And when I read this story and I read this guy joking about working a double shift, it made me so mad because it was really just so lame. There was a sense of entitlement to it that was so lame. We came to this country because you could work like hell and make something of yourself. We didn't really think beyond that because even that seemed like such a dream because you could work like hell as a Jew in the Soviet Union and still get nowhere, right? So we never thought to a spot where you might sort of actually have the luxury of resting on your laurels. And when I encountered this gentleman sort of expressing just that privilege, it was extremely off-putting, and I wanted to address it.
So great. I'm going to ask you one more question. I know that we could certainly talk about, are there any challenges you've seen in the political climate in the last few months? But I have a feeling we're going to get into that hope soon when we open things up. So I'm going to jump over the challenges and the difficulties and the fucks for just a moment, and right into what, if any, opportunities have you seen? What places of possibility have you seen in the past few months? If there's anything in particular that you see as a source of hope or possible fuel for those who wish to continue to fight for progressive values.
Okay. Well, I would certainly like to hear what people in the audience have to say about this. I certainly don't consider myself an expert on it, but just speaking amateurishly and anecdotally, it seems the degree to which we're in crisis is the degree to which we're also in an unprecedented amount of hopefulness. America is being made great in a new way by all sort of the activist fervor that is being stirred in response to what's coming out of Washington. There's also reason for hope because there was all this concern about the Trump ideology. Sorry for mentioning his name.
I'm going to jump in real quick and say that my children agreed that it was really toxic to hear this guy's name all the time, and my wife was the same. So we named him Dummy Diaper in our home. So there's just many options, a lot of names. You don't have to go there, just want you to know.
We'll call him
Dummy
DT. DT's only ideology is narcissism and incompetence. He's actually really bad at everything that he touches. And so it's giving us a lot of room to sort of, and time to sort of refine our game and take things back in a lasting way. One must hope that no great crisis occurs while this is happening, because only God knows what his incompetence would result in then. But sort of the scarier thing that we feared has not come to pass quite as I feared it. So there's two things right there.
I think also, and I'll speak because I can now, because as you eloquently put, the US side of things, Boris, so thank you for that. I'll speak about being, so from the Egyptian side of me. So as far as US foreign policy is concerned, I think what the fascist fuck has done is remove a mask that many Americans have refused to look beyond, especially if they're Democrats. I'm a registered independent. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican, and I had massive problems with both Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, but that's another issue. But having watched, fascist fuck, almost said his name, having watched him in Saudi Arabia recently, this fucking disastrous trip, where he sold a fascist regime that treats women like children for their entire lives, $110 billion worth of weapons that they can then use to continue to obliterate the poorest country in the region, Yemen. And then for so many Americans to think that this is unique to him if you are a Democrat, it is not. Obama sold the Saudis $60 billion worth of weapons, and so on and so forth. This is a long and ugly history of US foreign policy in many parts of the world, but I speak specifically as someone from the Middle East and North Africa. So I think what he's done is he's made, or at least I'm hoping he's made, people realize the true ugliness of US foreign policy, because at the very same time that his entourage were basically kissing the ass of this other fascist. It was like fascists and fascists. They were unloading on the Iranians, who are also, I'm no fan of the Iranians, but if you're going to attack the Iranian regime, then surely you cannot be doing it with a straight face as you're selling another fascist regime weapons. So I think what he's done is he's helped to remove that mask. As you said, Guantanamo remained opened under Obama, drones under Obama, the continued support, as I mentioned in my letter, of Sisi and other dictators in my parts of the world. So I think it's time for my fellow Americans, so to speak, to realize that US foreign policy has been disastrous in so many parts of the world, and it has for a long time.
I'm just going to echo that with, it's making me think about Moja Kaf's essay in here, Syrian-American novelist and poet, Muslim woman. And she writes in her letter to a younger Muslim protege, she says, think about it this way. Maybe there's something positive in the racism being all out in the open, because at least it's visible. And I think that's the unmasking that you're talking about, that this has been a problem and a part of the fabric of the society in many different ways. So has misogyny. And we'd love to think that sexism is over. It'd be fabulous to say that. At the same time, there's also something maybe damaging about there being people who say sexism is over, when meanwhile there are so many struggles that women are absolutely still experiencing in our society in the United States. And the same thing with when it comes to institutional racism and people of color's experiences, and those not always being entirely visible to all people in the population. Now it's visible. Now it's unmasked. Now we can't say, oh, we've had Obama, we're post-racial. Remember that? Remember when we were post-racial for a moment? And it was sort of over, according to some mainstream conversation, rhetoric that was going on. And so there is something that can possibly be an opportunity about the bigotry being unmasked, about it being out in the open. I know you were speaking about foreign policy in particular, but I think it does translate as well to some of the other issues and assaults that we see that have ratcheted up in intensity, but also at least are visible, and they have galvanized a lot of response as well. They've galvanized a lot of very vocal acts of resistance, from marches to phone calls. I mean, I think that the Indivisible Guide has been a really powerful movement. Just one example, putting pressure on Congress for values. some aspects of that resistance is really working, and I think part of what's awakened and galvanized people is that these things are unmasked, and we're looking at them very directly in a collective way, maybe in a new way. So, there's a thought. And I think we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions from the audience for us at this time.
Or comments.
Or
If
comments.
you want to raise your hand, I'll bring you a mic if you want to ask a question or spark a discussion, if anything has caught your ear. So, I know it's tough to go first, but good on you.
Thank you. This is kind of a comment to Mona. It seemed to me that you're writing about yourself, actually, writing to Sally. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about your own struggle and awakening and arrival at this revolutionary phase that you're writing about.
Thank you, Leta. Are you calling me a narcissist? That's okay. I fully claim it. No, I'm kidding. Thank you, Leta. No, I think it is a pertinent part of my letter, because I think when I met this young woman who really does exist, and you know, it's a huge honor for me to be recognized by these young women, you know, in the various places where I travel, and they remind me of being my 19-year-old self, kind of on the precipice, you know, discovering the word feminism for something that I was experiencing but just didn't have the word for. So I thought, you know, it was a great opportunity for me to kind of to talk to that younger self through this young woman that I encountered. And I think one of the biggest challenges for me was kind of trying to unpack all of the things from my faith and cultural background that had to wrestle with my feminism, and I couldn't take them on all at once, which is why I also mentioned all of these amazing feminists who helped me along the way, because their words really were these totems that I carried around, because it was such a daunting task. You know, I'm Muslim, I'm from Egypt, my family moved to the UK when I was 7, then we moved to Saudi Arabia when I was 15, and I was traumatized into feminism in Saudi Arabia. And then I moved to Jerusalem for a while as a journalist, so I experienced, you know, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as a reporter there. And then I moved to the US in 2000. So when I met this young woman with this kind of American English accented Arabic, she embodied all that complication and confusion that I've now embraced. But when I was her age, it was, you know, overwhelming. So I think, you know, and I love these experiments where people say, write a letter to your younger self, like Solange Knowles recently did, you know, beautifully and eloquently put into words about, you know, how you're going to grow up to be this incredible, as she is, person. So I think especially now when we have a sexual predator for a president, and we realize that we're not post-feminist, we never have been. Even if Hillary Clinton had become president, we would never have been post-feminist. We're so far away from that. I think for me, young women especially represent such an incredible force and energy that too often, you know, with all this stop crying like a girl, stop throwing like a girl, stop what, as if girls are the worst. Girls are the best things in the world for me because of this incredible passion and energy. So if it reads like a letter, then I'm honored if it reads like a letter to me. Thank you.
Got another question over here.
Hi. This is basically for any of you. So I understand that you can see the unmasking of all of these terrible things as a positive thing. But how do you reach the people who don't care? Like how much is this book preaching to the choir, as it were? And how do you reach beyond the people who are going to go pick up this book and actually try to change minds? It's something that I struggle with a lot, and I really don't know the answer to. So any thoughts on that would be much appreciated.
I didn't have the time to read this, but I'm very quickly going to read one paragraph in response to your question, because I do have, after engaging with Mr. Roll, I do have an addendum to my fellow liberals. And it says, If this election can inspire us to anything, liberal friends, let's not only redouble our efforts to advocate for the forgotten, the unprotected, and the newly threatened, let's also do the last thing I know so many of us are planning to do. Let's get out of our comfort zones. Let's leave New York and its groupthink. Let's lose our certainty, perhaps our arrogance. Let's get off social media and its sanction of the kind of condescension and scorn we would never permit ourselves face to face. Let's be the person who disagrees at the dinner party. Let's get into the country. Let's talk to people who are nothing like us politically. I mean, of course, the poll rolls, not the bigots. Let's try to understand them on their terms. We are listening to them as little as they are listening to us, and I'm not sure who stopped listening first.
Okay, I'm going to add to that, Boris, if I may. Had I written that, I would have said this is the job of white Americans. It is not my job. As a brown woman, as a Muslim, as a feminist, as so many things that are obliterated and dehumanized by these racist, fascist fucks who voted for Donald Trump, it is not my job to go out there and talk to them. It is not my job to go out there and persuade them of my humanity. It is the job of white people who refuse to have these conversations at Thanksgivings and Christmas times. And because of you, we are where we are right now. It is not my fault that a fascist fuck is president, and it is not my job to persuade the fascist, racist fucks who voted for him that I'm a human being as they are. I am adamant about that.
I would absolutely second that.
I'm thirding it. And I'm thirding with a different perspective. I mean, I think I appreciate, that's part of what this book is. It really is a kaleidoscopic gathering of voices coming from different angles, speaking through different prisms, really proliferating all of the many perspectives that I think we urgently need. We need to be in conversation with each other across experiences, across differences. And I absolutely agree with both of you that that work is needed, that those people need that, but everyone can't do that work. And I mean, I'm kind of agree with Moment that like, I understand that there are people who voted for Trump who are good people and who, you know, whatever that means, and who weren't necessarily consciously thinking that they were explicitly voting for bigotry. I also know that a vote for Trump was also a vote that implicitly allowed the dehumanization of my children and really sort of questions my children's right to exist. That's how I experience it in my body and in my life. And not just my children, myself and my wife. And so I'm aware of that, and I think there's a lot of work to be done. That's the good news. We don't all have to be on all fronts at the same time. Not all of us have Thanksgiving tables with Trump supporters. Some people do. Some of us have very different lives. So there isn't just one way to move forward. And it doesn't have to be all of us. And I think it is really important to know that there are some of us for whom that's not our work. And then there are some of us for whom it is our work. And that's great. That can happen too. In terms of moving forward, I don't know that we actually need to persuade people who are choosing to fill their minds with things from Breitbart and Fox News of our humanity in order to win the next election back from the GOP. I don't actually think that's necessary. I do think we have the numbers. I think that progressive whites plus people of color are actually a majority in this country in terms of voting. Not everybody turned out last time. So that's one piece to think about. But in terms of this book, because you also asked about, is this preaching to the choir? The thing about books, the amazing thing about every single book in this room and in this glorious building is that they are so democratic. Anyone can pick it up and open it. There is absolutely nothing on here that locks a Trump supporter or any kind of person out of this book. Anyone can turn the pages and read it. So it's not that a person who voted this way or has this or that belief or reads this or that website that we may perceive as toxic is not welcome to read it. Everybody is welcome to the page. Boris here has a letter specifically, reaching out to Trump supporters. That is here. At the same time, this book, in a way, is preaching to the choir. I think preaching to the choir is profoundly and incredibly important, especially when that choir's civil rights and beloved culture and environment are under attack. There are millions of us in this choir, And we are all kaleidoscopically, beautifully different from each other, and also have some core values that may beautifully overlap. And I think there's a lot of singing to do to each other. So I think there's value also in that piece about preaching to the choir. I wanted to create a book that would be able to be company for people for whom the election of Donald Trump was a source of grief, rage, insecurity, fear, and complicated emotions of that kind. That is not to say that other people can't open it, but I was aware that a lot of that was present and in our society, and I thought that it would be worthwhile to have a book that would be that. And one of the most moving emails I've gotten since the book came out was just a few days ago from a woman who said, you know, I am an activist, I'm an African-American woman, and after the election, I didn't want to get out of bed. I felt like I couldn't do anything. I couldn't read headlines. I didn't want to live. And now I start my morning. Every morning I get up and I read one essay in Radical Hope. And then I start my day. And I'm able to engage with the news, and I'm able to do activism, and that's just one person's experience. But that was so moving to me, because it felt like, for her, it was fuel, it was food, it was giving her something that she needed. Like you said, that words are useful ammunition, right, in your essay. And they can be useful ammunition, they can be food, they can be fuel, and I think that's worthwhile too.
Do you have any other questions? Maybe from House Right? Been over here for a little bit.
Yeah, what's going on this side of the room?
Again, it can be tough to follow up some discussion like that, but don't be shy.
Yes.
So I found that I've tried a lot of times to kind of be that person, you know, at the dinner table, kind of just, and not even in an angry way, just I overhear something and it, you know, bothers me. I want to step in, just, you know, to give the different perspective to it. But a lot of times I've found that it isn't even like, you know, ignorance at some point. They just like don't agree. They don't want to agree. And I could, you know, put it in the simplest terms like, well, that's not right, but you have to look at it this way, but think about this and that and all this stuff. And, you know, it gets me very fired up. But again, sometimes it just feels like there's literally no way of getting across to it. Again, no matter like how easily I put it. So what exactly would you suggest for those people who, you know, how you were saying there, people were finally like unmasking, which is good, and it can, you know, spark this kind of the conversation and keep it going. But for the people that, you know, it has been unmasked and it's out in the open, but they're still just, do you suggest like, you know what I mean? Like, what do you do then at that point? What do you think?
I think family events present a particular problem and a particular challenge. The thing that I was referring to, first of all, when I imagine interacting or engaging in this way, I don't define success as persuading the other person to change their mind. Almost to spite me, they won't change their mind. My only goal is to establish my existence as a human being, to three-dimensionalize myself in front of that person. Because when we when we exist in silos, it becomes so much easier to demonize, dehumanize, and stigmatize people who are outside that silo. So when I travel the country, and I go everywhere in the country, and my favorite part of the country is one of the most conservative parts of the country, which is the Mountain West. Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho. I go through those places a lot. And when I go there, and I understand that I have an advantage in that I am white and male, right? And so I'm engaged with differently, and I understand that. But it also creates an opportunity for me. And I always lead, I volunteer the fact that I'm Jewish. I volunteer the fact that I believe this or not that, or I'm liberal or whatever, right? And we may not leave that interaction as friends, right? But I know that that person will think twice next time before signing on, before raising his rifle, so to speak, right? That rifle will not go up as readily, should it ever come to that, because he met me. And that's the only goal that I have. And I do that every time. And then each of us has concrete abilities and skills and talents that we can deploy in the service of this mission, right? I am a fiction writer. I could probably work up a program that sends me to middle schools around Kansas and Iowa and Missouri and Nebraska to talk about my background in the Soviet Union, right? Innocent subject. And as part of that conversation, I can talk about being Jewish. I can talk about what New York is really like, as opposed to what the kids in that classroom think New York is like, and who actually lives in New York, and so on and so forth. And there's a way to, and I think, right? I think each of us has something to offer of that sort, different for everyone, that does not have to amount to a confrontation.
I'm not known to be a diplomatic person, so my suggestion to you is that sometimes you just have to call things for what they are, or call them what they are. When you encounter someone who you think is racist, tell them you're being racist. Because there was this ridiculous discussion that happened after Trump was elected where it's not useful to call people racist. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? If someone is a racist, you tell them they're a racist. If someone is a misogynist, you tell them they're... And then there's something that happens when someone is shocked into the realization that, my God, this word is being used against me, that even if they don't, to spite you, they will deny all of this. Just hearing the word racist might do something to them in that they feel shame, hopefully. But I have to tell you that sometimes my biggest challenge isn't talking to these people with whom I refuse to negotiate my humanity. My biggest challenge sometimes is with white liberals. So my book tour a couple of years ago took me to several places across the US, and one of them being Texas. And I spoke in Dallas and Houston. And I will never forget this white woman who got up in Dallas and asked me how she could help Egyptian women. And like, are you fucking kidding me? In Dallas, Texas, where 40 abortion clinics are now, I think, 10, where you have a combination of militarism and religious zealotry, and you want to go all the way to Egypt to rescue Egyptian women? So I was like, you need to rescue women right here. So my biggest challenge with white liberals who think they appreciate my humanity, but it's a humanity that needs to be rescued, is work right here. And the fact that we have a sexual predator for president, the fact that even had Hillary Clinton been voted president, I have massive problems with Hillary Clinton and her own record when it comes to women's rights and LGBTQ rights and all kinds of stuff. So sometimes your biggest challenge as a white person, and I'm assuming you identify as white, is that you tell your fellow white Americans, especially white liberal women, that they have to step out of what we now call white feminism and recognize that the fight that is ahead is not about just misogyny. It's about, like I said in my letter, the intersection of misogyny, homophobia, racism, classism, ableism, so many isms that we have to move beyond the fact that it's just what affects white women. And once it's like with queer rights, marriage equality has not solved everything, because there are many people, even though marriage equality is now the law, cannot even achieve stepping out of their house being the people who they are. So don't forget your fellow liberal white Americans and this big fight you need as well.
Yeah, great answers. And I would say just, it depends on the conversation, because it sounds like you're talking, there's this sort of strangers when you're traveling thing, which I think is really, can be really important and valuable if you have the energy for it, or that can be really important work. But as you're talking also about in the family context, and I think what Boris made an important point about, it's not necessarily the goal to change someone's mind, but to stay in the conversation. And it depends. When someone is really explicitly racist or misogynistic, calling out, there's a role, there's a place for that. But I think also there is a real power of connection and of just staying in conversation. These things take a very, very long time. I mean, we have had institutional racism in this country for 400, 500 years. And we've been in the process of undoing it for what? 50 years? Maybe, if we think about the civil rights movement. I mean, people of color have certainly been working to dismantle it this whole entire time. I mean, during slave times, absolutely. But these are movements that still are underway. It's a long process. There are maybe 10,000 conversations that a person has to have with another person in order to come to a place where they say, you know what, gay people are just as human as other people, and I'm going to affirm that, to really change their mind. And you might be one of those 10,000 conversations. And I think that there's something to be said for just staying in connection. Again, if you're not harming yourself or if it doesn't feel destructive, there's power in just being in conversation with people. And even if you don't see them move or change in that moment, you think, they're never going to change. I feel like one of the sources of hope and sense of possibility that I have is watching what's happened with gay rights in this country. And I know there's still a lot more to do and a lot further to go. But I got married in 2002, before it was legal anywhere in the country. It was an act of civil disobedience. We just had a wedding. We were the only people we knew who called each other wife. I mean, even lesbians were like, you call her your wife? What is this? This is a way of calling it a wedding. You're both in wedding dresses. I can't compute. You know, it was a strange thing. I mean, really, like all the dykes we knew had never seen two women in wedding dresses, calling it a wedding and not a civil union. And then a couple of years later, it's 2004, and we're back around at City Hall, and there's tons of wedding dresses standing next to each other. And it's not just about marriage, but the shift that has happened in our culture since I first got married in 2002, the possibilities for me to have dignity and civil rights, but also like human connection and visibility, the extent to which I can be seen with my family by people, strangers and members of many communities in this country, is a testament to how we can move culture forward and we can move consciousness forward. And it happens with words as useful ammunition. It happens with conversations. It happens over the Thanksgiving dinner table. It happens in taxi cabs. My friend Kate Schutz, who's in this book, she wrote the wonderful kids book Rad Women A to Z. She has a great letter in here, which is a letter to her fellow white people. And she was in a taxi cab in Fresno, and the cabbie was talking about how he'd voted for Trump, and she stayed in conversation with him. And she's white, and she's aware of the fact that allowed the conversation to maybe open or gave her some space inside to be able to have it. But by the end of the conversation, he was talking about, you know, I've always thought, everyone's talking about this thing about the transgender bathrooms and how bad it is, but they're just people. They're just trying to pee. I mean, what's the big deal? And she had this long conversation with him, and sort of by the end, you know, they had this connection, and he had had a shift. And then he started talking about all the things about Trump, and was he really going to take care of them around healthcare, or had he made a mistake? And staying in the conversation with him was important and useful. So when it's possible, keep connecting, because I do think that that's how we move culture forward. Coming back to the piece about, you know, the shift around culture and consciousness around gay and queer identities, that happened because people came out, because people spoke their truths, because people loved somebody who had come out and spoken their truth, and they started speaking that truth, and it happened in legislation, and it happened around Thanksgiving tables, and it happened with so many forms of resistance. And so we can continue to move the culture forward, and hopefully the legislative landscape will continue to catch up.
Well, that's about all we have time for, but thank you guys so much for keeping the conversation going. Let's give them another round of applause.